Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm watching the participants continue to tick up, so we'll give it another minute or so. Okay, I will start with some introductions and housekeeping matters, and I suspect as I speak, we'll be joined by some more of our colleagues. So welcome everyone to this Raben Town Hall. We are so excited to see you here. Those of you who are not familiar with Raben, we are a social justice oriented consulting firm based primarily in DC. Oh, and Robert Raben, our founder, has joined us. This is fantastic. Robert, do you want to say hi to everyone on the webinar?
Oh, hello. Really, really excited to be here. So glad we're doing this. Thank you so much, Christine and Jurdo and Emily.
So, there's an unexpected surprise and bounty to have Robert here as well. So, Robert, I might direct some questions your way as well, even though, he's disappeared from the panel presentation. So just a few notes of housekeeping and just a reminder for everyone that the webinar will be recorded. We've already gotten a question in the chat about whether a copy of the webinar will be emailed to attendees. The answer is yes. You'll get a link after the recording. And just a brief note to say, we live in some anxious times, and so we ask that you please exercise discretion in terms of who you share the recording with or, the kinds of information that you share from the webinar. So just, some common sense and good judgment on that front, I think would be appreciated by both the panelists and your fellow participants. So our topic today is essentially DEI 2.0, right? Like, what is it going to look like? What's it going to be? How are we going to get there? Um, I was on a call with a colleague yesterday, and we were talking about a number of roundtables that we've been having. And she said, I feel like maybe we need to move beyond the phase of, well, this is a bummer. And I laughed and I thought, yeah, she's right? Because we had a bunch of time where we were like, yeah, this is terrible. It's terrible here. Is it terrible for you? Yes, it's terrible for me. Is it terrible for them? Yes, it's also terrible. But so it's probably time for us to start broadening and deepening our conversation and thinking about the future. And the question is, how do we do that? So I think in order to do that, we need to know where actual humans are. Like, where are people today? What are they thinking? What are they feeling? What are their values? And we need to figure out how to work with them, actual humans again, right? To co-create with them what comes next. So brilliantly, we have two panelists who are here to help us do that very thing. We're joined by Chris Matthews. She is a leading public opinion pollster with Bellwether Polling. Raben supports a project called Next Level that worked with Chris and her team and another polling firm as well to do the polling that she'll be sharing with you today. Chris is just a highly respected, preeminent political pollster. Her insights have been invaluable, and I know she's really helped me understand over the course of the last year where actual people in America stand today. We're also really lucky to be joined by Geert Armalia. He is both a doctor and a health policy expert and the senior policy officer for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Girdar has given me advice for sprained ankles, and he has, I think, his thumb on the pulse. There's my medical analogy. I got it in there on where, what people are doing right now, what's innovative, what's working, what isn't, what are the prognosticators, the people who are thinking forward in a forward-looking way, the visionaries, where are they in this moment? So those are our two panelists. So I'm going to start with a few questions for Chris, just so we have that working baseline of where are people. So Chris, let me just start by asking, you just did a huge polling and research project. There were 10 focus groups, a poll of more than 3,000 registered voters. You did two call boards at the end of it. This was a follow-up to another poll that you'd done last year. Was there anything that surprised you about the polling and research results?
Yeah, thanks, Emily, and nice to be here. So much. I think I have a few slides. I ultimately did like 77 slides from all this research for the Next Level team, and I will spare you all that. But I do want to put one slide on about how diversity, equity, inclusion, and DEI is perceived. I think so we had done a national poll in June of 2024, and then this updated poll was done in June of this year. And given all the rhetoric from the Trump administration, sort of like on day one attacking DEI, I was expecting to see some numbers in terms of how people perceive DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, that were not very great. The good news is diversity, equity, inclusion, or the acronym DEI, actually improved. Diversity, equity, inclusion, the full phrase, 72% of people have a positive view of that whole phrase, which is sort of unchanged from a year ago. But the acronym DEI actually has a more positive rating than negative. 56% view the acronym positively, 30% negative. And so the question is, how could that have happened when basically all the news about DEI has been so negative? Well, the shift in this has occurred among the Democratic base. They got the hair on the back of their neck standing up, and they said this is a political fight. And they had sort of been mid-level on DEI, maybe not paying attention, not totally tuned in a year ago. And now the impression of DEI among Democrats is so positive, 76% positive, 12% negative. It's sort of mid-range among independents. Independents are paying less attention to this conversation. Republicans and Democrats realize it's become completely polarized. They don't like that. They don't like that it's become partisan and polarized. And Republicans, and actually, despite what you're hearing from this administration, Republicans are a little bit net negative on DEI, the acronym, 40% positive, 46% negative, but take that in, 40% are positive. So there's not this massive opposition to DEI that the Trump administration and others would like to have you believe and would like to have their targets believe in terms of capitulating on this. So that, I think, was one of the most important findings. Like, if everybody who was like shrinking back on this saw that this was where the public was, I think maybe they would make some different decisions.
Now, that's very interesting. So DEI, even the acronym, not dead. Is there one takeaway that you would want people to have from the results? And maybe that's it, but I don't know if you have another one.
I do. And, I think one of the challenges for DEI is that in the public's mind, DEI is a very limited thing. It is entirely about race. It's about setting quotas by race in hiring and promotion. And that is where it is somewhat polarizing. And the other side has done a very good job of convincing people that that is all it's about, and that decisions are made on race, not qualifications. It's either or. And when we look at the groups that voters think face the most bias and discrimination, I was really surprised by this, Emily, that the top of the list were two groups that maybe don't always come to mind when you think about those facing bias and discrimination. That's people with a physical disability, older adults over 50. We have LGBTQ people, people with mental health issues. Black men and women were a little bit lower down the list. And there is a tremendous opportunity I think, for advocates to broaden how DEI is perceived, that it is something that helps address a wide range of situations, that helps a wide range of people. And this is why it's both an opportunity, but it's also a critical need to educate. So what we found was a big gap between the people that voters say face bias and discrimination, and the percentage of people who say that DEI is helping them. And that's what I'm representing here in these three columns. And then that third column is that gap between like a group that faces bias and the percent saying DEI helps them. So for example, older adults over 50, people with mental health issues, people with health issues, physical disability, there is the largest gap between perceived bias and discrimination and the sense that DEI is helping them. So there's a tremendous opportunity both to explain, educate, but also to think about in the future what might, DEI sort of be expanded to include. So that's something that was both really interesting
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to take in, and I'm sure some people on the call are like, well, this is all fine and good data, but what am I supposed to actually say about DEI right now, right? Or diversity, equity, and inclusion? It seems like just such a minefield to navigate where someone's going to be mad at you no matter what. So how do you think people should be talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in light of your research?
So I'm gonna sort of stick to the messaging that we tested. And we tested it both in the survey, and then we tested it in the focus groups and the qual boards, and we tested it in 2 buckets. One bucket was sort of what to say in the cultural arena, the arena of like attacks on museums, education, history, science, research, and then the other bucket is what to say in the private sector. If a company, wants to talk about their commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, what would a private sector person say? And those are 2 distinct buckets. But what we did find is there is some crossover in terms of perception that the Trump administration has overreached that includes both of those buckets. So in one bucket, there is a sense among all across the board, Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, that attacks on like what the Smithsonian can exhibit or say, or like the idea that we should diminish slavery or that we should erase people from websites, that the sort of scrubbing of history or the micromanagement of national parks or Smithsonian museums or others in terms of fitting into America's great and we've never had a blemish, that is overreach. And so we tested some messages, and I'm going to skip this right now. So I'm going to get to the messages in that area. And there's 2 that tested really well with people who are sort of in the middle or maybe even opponents of DEI, like Republicans, white people, older men, sticking to a very, sort of evenly toned defense of history and the truth telling of history is a very effective message. So the top testing message was, we can't just tell a version of history that reflects only American greatness. Telling the truth isn't anti-American. History is history, good, bad, and ugly. And our children need to learn the truth so they don't risk making the same mistakes. And I can tell you in the focus groups, that's what, even before testing a message like this, people would volunteer, like, why are you doing it? History is history. Like, you can't spin history. And so that was a real overreach in terms of the Trump administration. And that is across the board. So that is a very safe message to be talking about in this cultural context. The next testing message was one that was had a little more bite to it, that was more popular among Democrats and Black Americans, which had a little more heat to it, which is we should not try and whitewash our history by eliminating the stories of people like Jackie Robinson or Harriet Tubman. They achieved something important, and the color of their skin was part of it. Government's trying to erase whole groups of people, and that's wrong. So that, again, you sort of know your audience, and that also was a really good message. The other 2 are about cutting medical research and cutting scientific research, and that doing so by claiming you're getting rid of DEI doesn't really sell with people. And, I had a white woman who was a Trump voter say, actually, DEI is necessary in medical research because people are different. Their health is different. So that was really understandable.
That's so interesting, Chris. And I'll just say for everyone whose eyes are bad like mine, or you're scrambling to take notes, we will be sharing the webinar recording again. You'll get a link. And then I also put a link in the chat thread to the Next Level website, which has the full polling results. So you don't need to scramble to write all of this down.
And then with the private sector, we found a really successful message. First of all, and this is a theme that we uncovered in 2024, but also is true in 2025, that especially even among conservatives, they do not like this idea that government should tell the private sector or companies what they should be doing in their business. So that if a company, and these are literal quotes, I mean, if a company, if they make money using DEI, then they should just keep doing it. If they think it helps them target customers, they should keep doing it. And so my recommendation for messaging, if I am a company, is first of all, people are somewhat cynical about the private sector, right? Like they believe that companies do things based on a profit motive, and that's believable, that's credible. And less so about like having really internal core values. They see companies sort of swinging along a pendulum, that under the Biden administration, they were forced to swing left. On the Trump administration, they're forced to swing right, and they're doing it for survival. But if you're a company and you're talking about this actually makes sense from a bottom line perspective, a business perspective, a profit perspective, a targeting perspective, then people will be like, yeah, that's believable. And so the top message that we found for the private sector is, look, the US is diverse. So are the customers of many businesses. If a company wants to appeal to different types of customers, then it makes sense for their team to be diverse too. That's why successful large corporations like Apple, Walmart, Costco say their DEI programs help them compete. And it's why their shareholders, i.e. focused on profit, have overwhelmingly rejected proposals to eliminate these policies. The idea, the fourth testing message, which is companies should get to decide what they want to do without government interference. If a company wants to have diversity, equity, inclusion, that's fine. But if they choose not to, that's also fine. And that was really high with conservative. Democrats didn't like that as much, quite frankly. But still, this argument, that a pragmatic argument that this is a business decision and it's a company's right to make that decision without government interference is a strong message.
Oh, so interesting, Chris. And I will tell you, when I first got the results of the poll, I was pretty surprised by some of the results, which is, I guess, why we do polling. Girder, were any of the results of the polling and research a surprise to you? Like, how did you feel about the prominent role that health equity, which I know you're particularly interested in and the foundation works on a lot, how did that feel to you?
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, I think both some surprises and some things that maybe confirmed some prior ideas I had. But just to address the health piece in particular, Christine talked about it a little bit, but there was very, very strong support for this idea that medical research should not be a victim of attacks on diversity, equity, inclusion. And that one didn't surprise me very much because I think people have real everyday experiences with how medical research and medical breakthroughs impact their own lives. So whether it's having a family member who can get a heart valve replaced without having to do open heart surgery, or a sister or brother who gets breakthrough cancer therapy that uses their own immune cells to attack the cancer. I think people just have so many experiences with medical breakthroughs, medical technology, changing their lives. And I think that's why we're seeing such positive findings in terms of that connection between the importance of DEI and medical research.
I love it. It was a very tactful way of saying that you were not surprised because you were more well-informed than I was. I'll allow it.
Yeah. So that could be my bias, and maybe that is an important point for us to think about. The things that we may assume based on our own fields, based on our own experience about the impacts of DEI may not be apparent to others. That's why we need to tell these positive, true, affirming stories about how DEI is impacting people's everyday lives. I'll mention two other things from the findings. One, on this piece around people with disabilities, older people, folks with mental health issues, being called out as ones who face an inordinate amount of discrimination, and they are groups that folks in the polls said aren't really being helped by diversity, equity, inclusion. One thing I'll call out, and it relates to a question we got, is I think some of the recognition about the barriers that folks with disabilities face in hiring or in the workplace, I think some of it could be from what we experienced during the COVID pandemic. I think another thing that we're seeing with those findings is that this was a nationally representative sample. And those three things, being 50 or older, having a physical disability, confronting a mental health issue, those are nearly universal experiences if you live long enough. And I think that's part of why we're seeing people say, those are the things that we want to see DEI do more about. And I think, as Christine said, it is a real opportunity because we know that, again, if you just take the healthcare space, efforts to advance disability inclusion, to make the experience of people with disabilities in healthcare settings more responsive, more respectful to their needs, those things improve care for everybody. Because it might mean having medical information in plain language. It might mean making sure that hospital rooms are places where there isn't so much ambient noise that you can't understand what your nurse or doctor is telling you. So I do think those present really incredible opportunities to show the value of diversity, equity, inclusion.
I love that. And I love the concrete application of all of this. So speaking of which, RWJF has been really active in this space, both as a funder and in some ways as like a participant or an advocate. You all are trying to protect what you can of diversity, equity, inclusion, and you're being forward-looking. Tell us a little bit about what the foundation is up to these days.
Yeah, so our mission as an organization is to ensure that health is not a privilege for some, but that it's a right for all. And we recognize that diversity, equity, inclusion efforts are central to that mission. We're doing a couple things. First, we have a national initiative through which we're working with 20 organizations, including Raben and Next Level, to defend diversity, equity, inclusion, and to help shape what the future of DEI looks like. So that's everything from supporting impact litigation to challenge the anti-equity executive orders and actions that we're seeing nearly every day from the federal government, to supporting narrative and communication strategies so people both know how and to whom to talk about the work of equity. And then finally, we are trying to support leaders across sectors who are facing headwinds to DEI work. Some of the challenges that people are facing are very sector specific, but I think most of them are really common across sectors and industries. So we want those people talking with one another, sharing ideas, and being able to support one another, because this work has always been hard. It has always been challenging, but now is an era in which people are facing not just attacks on their organizations, but threats to their own physical safety and security. And we want to make sure those folks are seen, that they're heard, and that they feel supported.
Oh, we're so glad and grateful for all of the work that you all are doing in this space. I suspect that a lot of leaders, including ones who are on this call, like, okay, so I have some sense of where people are today. I have some sense of the messages that I need. But what are we going to do to build, a vision? Like, what is 2.0 going to look like, and how are we going to get there? Chris, I wanted to go back to you as we pivot a little bit towards talking about the future. What did the polling and research say about what voters want from DEI programs going forward? Oh, you're muted. But it was like magic how that slide just appeared.
I can't do two things. I can't put a slide and also unmute myself, apparently. Sorry. So yeah, this was a really interesting question that we asked at the end of the survey, and we gave voters permission to think expansively. We said, look, the future of diversity, equity, and inclusion doesn't have to look like the past. Here's a list of ideas. Select the following options that you think would be most important for companies, organization, or schools to adopt. And again, we're not perfect. I mean, maybe we didn't have every possible option, but we tried. We tried to think about a whole range of things where, DEI might look like in the future. And so what we found, and again, I apologize for the small type. Number one, transparency in pay and hiring practices. That was really surprising to all of us, I think. And it was across the board. It was like every cohort wanted this. So then we went into our qual board, which is our online qualitative discussions, and asked, what does that look like? And we found some different results. So like in the heart research team's work with men under the age of 45, they wanted to see transparency in pay. Like, tell me what other people are making. That makes me feel respected. That makes me feel informed. But we had a group of independents of mixed ages split between Harris and Trump voters, and they actually were not so sure they wanted transparency in pay. They don't think it's anybody's business what they're earning, that sort of thing. What they wanted to see was transparency in the company's goals and plans. Like, where are we headed? Why are you doing this? Like, that respects me. And Emily, the one thing that we haven't brought up in these findings is how important the word respect is to people, and that they're looking for respect. And what does respect mean? Respect is being honest. It's being transparent, and not not hiding behind like corporate speak or whatever. So anyway, transparency. And then, of course, again, we're seeing this thread throughout all of our data, programs designed to improve accessibility for both people with disabilities and those without. So we have that again. We see a real need there. We also found employer-paid emergency childcare for working parents to be a top priority. This was particularly true this was the number one priority for, I believe it was Hispanic women and Black women, and women who are younger. And then, things like veteran hiring programs. The next one was really interesting to me, more networking opportunities, especially for people who do not come from privileged backgrounds. So if you think about equity, there's a real opportunity here. This came from one of our young white men. He was, I think, 22, Trump supporter, but did not come from a privileged background. And he said, you know what I'd really like to see is like networking opportunities. He felt like the job market's really tough, and that as somebody from a lower income background, he wasn't part of he and his parents didn't know a bunch of like sort of high place corporate people. They didn't know how to work in a country club environment. Like, help me network, help me figure out this working world. And that is an advantage that people who come from affluent backgrounds have that people from lower income backgrounds don't have. So that was a really interesting perspective. And so we actually added this to the survey as an option after hearing that in our focus group. So those are some of the top things. Programs that increase attention to rural areas that are underserviced and under-resourced. That was popular among rural voters, but also independents. So those types of things, and also just a real opportunity to create, affinity groups and groups that help support once you're in the door. I think, again, voters don't understand that DEI is not just something that gets you in the door. It's something that happens to make people be able to thrive once they're in the door. And that's something they need a better understanding of.
Oh, it's so interesting. Girder, how do you think leaders across different sectors, I think we have people from, the corporate space, nonprofits, NGOs, maybe some government employees on their own time, right? How should leaders, do you think, be interpreting these results about what voters say they want? And are you seeing anyone do these things particularly effective? Like, I think you're seeing and hearing a lot from your grantees and just from moving and being in these spaces. Like, what do you see that's working?
Yeah, I want to pick up on this theme of respect that Christine talked about, and bring it into the healthcare space, but hopefully make it valuable for folks regardless of what sector they're in. What we hear consistently from patients, from people, is that they want healthcare that's affordable, that's high quality, and that's respectful. And I think the respect piece connects directly to diversity, equity, inclusion efforts. Respect means that they are listened to and that their values and preferences are taken into consideration when it comes to decision making. That there are people within their healthcare team who are like them. And sometimes that may be defined by race. Sometimes it may be defined by the community you come from. Sometimes it may be defined by a shared faith. But people want somebody on their team that they can connect with personally and that just gets them. And then I think lastly, with respect, that their healthcare team is with them for the long haul, that it's not, and that there's a relationship being developed. And I hope that as people heard those elements of respect, they can connect it to efforts that they might be engaged in or might want to be engaged in as a company or as an organization. One example that I think captures a number of these elements really well in the healthcare space is that we've seen, and I think people can have appreciated to a greater and greater degree, that care during pregnancy is not what it should be. It is a complex, medically and emotionally taxing process to go through. And we see huge disparities in outcomes when it comes to maternal health, especially for Black women. One thing that health systems have started to do to both address discrimination in maternal health care and to create more respectful care overall is to introduce and reimburse doula supports for people throughout the course of prenatal, natal, and postnatal care. Doulas, as folks might know, are there to be an advocate for the patient, to provide physical, social, and spiritual support to that person as they're going through this experience. And this effort, which is often driven by a desire to reduce racial disparities, ends up improving care for all pregnant patients. It can, for example, reduce the rate of C-sections, and it can increase birth outcomes, improve birth outcomes for infants. So I think that's an incredible example of how diversity, equity, inclusion can address this like very common experience of being disrespected, whether it's in the workplace or in a healthcare setting. It can reduce racial disparities, which we know are pernicious, and it can improve care for everybody in the system.
That's so interesting. I was thinking about what you were saying about respect, both of you, and kind of extrapolating to some of the work that we're doing at Raben with this project Next Level. And, one of our core it's a philosophical commitment, but I think also a practical one, is that whatever happens next, whatever you want to call it, if you call it DEI 2.0, or you read Chris's polling deck and you say, oh, we need to rebrand it equal opportunity, whatever you call it, that it has to be something that we do with one another, and that the people who matter to you, however you define your community, right? Whether it's you're doing it in your workplace or in your school or the community that you live in or in your company, but that the people who matter to you need to be at the table with you. And I don't know that I'd ever quite made the connection before, but I feel like that's how you show that you respect them, right? That you're not going to come in and say, hey, all, this is the new vocabulary we need to use, and here's a new training, and, here's how we're going to do things from here on out. That we show respect. And I think, Gerdar, I don't think I'd really picked up on this before. It's also how we show care for one another. And, it's not so much medical care, but it is a different kind of care, right? It's like this social care. And whether it's you're in a company and you're figuring out, okay, who matters to me? And maybe it's your C-suite, maybe it's your employees, maybe it's your customers, or you're an NGO and you're thinking, it's my board, it's my staff, it's my funders. But whatever it is, I think bringing people into that conversation is how we show both respect and care. And I feel like that's Raben's, its next level's kind of core insight as to how we feel like, we should be moving forward. So that's my little product placement plug. So bear with me. I want to ask you both this question where people are trying to balance a lot, and I'm mindful of our time. I'm keeping an eye on things, and I know we have a couple of questions in the chat that we haven't gotten to. So I want to encourage people, put questions either in the Q&A in the webinar or in the chat thread, and we're going to set aside, probably about 15 minutes to get to hopefully everyone's questions. So, we want to make it a robust, open dialogue. But I wanted to ask the two of you another question, which is there's so much going on right now. There's so much to keep track of. And I think leaders in particular, whether you're an official CEO or a C-suite person or in management at your nonprofit, or you lead a division, or you're the leader of your family, they're balancing all of these competing needs, right? So there's trying to protect what we can, right? We have to defend what's left of our democracy, of diversity or whatever. But then also this need, which I think is more pressing than ever before, of how do we build the future, right? The 250th of the country is coming up, and that's a moment of reflection. We're told by Chris that people care about history, right? But we also need to think about, well, what does the next 250 years look like? And maybe we're all a little burned out also, right? So what is your best advice for people trying to balance these competing priorities? What do we think about that?
I'm happy to start. Tough question. I'd love to know what our attendees think about this too. But two things come to mind. The first is that when it's just kind of human nature that when we're in a defensive posture, we can lose perspective on ourselves. We can lose perspective on our own work. And I think we need to hold our diversity, equity, and inclusion work to the highest standards, meaning that that work should not be so sacred that we can't assess in a clear-eyed way whether it's working or not. And most organizations are doing multiple things at once. So it's not kind of a yes-no determination, but I was in a roundtable that Raben helped us pull together last week with healthcare leaders, and a senior leader from a biotech company said that this era that we're in, where there is fierce and cynical pushback on DEI work, has enabled them, and I'm using that word carefully, to assess which of their DEI efforts do they think are so important and so impactful that they're willing to go to bat for them, that they're willing to go to bat for them with their board, that they're willing to go to bat for them with the public, and even those bad faith actors that are ready to say everything under the DEI sun is illegal and un-American and divisive. And that, to me, I think is the posture that we really need to take. What are the things that we think are so important to mission and our people, the people that we're trying to serve, that we want to preserve it? And what are the things that we need to modify? I'll just add one other thing on history, and I want to recognize that not every organization can do this. But what we, as the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, have started to do is to go through a truth, repair, and transformation process. We are following the lead of many other philanthropies and other social sector organizations who have done this before us. But the basic idea is we have often told a very positive, overly sanitized, and inaccurate story about us as an institution. It's always about the good that we've done. And through the truth, repair, and transformation process, we're looking back at our history and saying, what are the ways in which we have fallen short? what are the ways in which we have maybe even harmed communities that have been marginalized by every other sector of society? And it's not about blame or judgment, but it's about being clear about how we could have done better and to use those lessons to reshape our strategy and our culture and the way that we do grant making in the future. And even if you can't do that at a large scale, I think there are ways to bring a truth and transformation lens to the work of diversity, equity, inclusion that can really get people out of their usual modes of thinking about the work.
That is so great that you all are doing that. That's fascinating. Chris, what do you think?
Well, my answer is going to fall short of that. I just want to say that right now. But I guess what I'm thinking about is, okay, so this is actually your initial question, Emily, is, and during this incredibly stressful, difficult, depressing time, how do you balance all this plus, all the other things? And so I actually have this conversation every Monday morning. One of my best friends and I, we meet up at 9 o'clock, we meet into a weight room and we're lifting weights. And she is always so depressed. Like she spent the weekend or whatever looking at her stream and like, oh, I mean, like everything's terrible. And I can agree with her, but then I also think it's important that you have to retain some optimism and some joy. And whatever personally, I think personally you have to take care of yourself. And I mean, whatever way that is, because I feel like the goal of this time and this administration is demoralization. It is overwhelm and demoralization. And if you fall into that, then you are without power. And I guess being a data person, when I look at the data, when I listen to what people say, it is not something, there is optimism to be found in there. Now, again, with an abuse of an executive power and other things, I mean, you can't control that necessarily, but I mean, eventually I feel like the most important thing is to reach out and instead of feeling like this is our own individual grief and problem, we have to join hands. I mean, there are more of us than there are of the opponents. And I feel like everybody, the administration's done a very good job of trying to divide and conquer. Like I'm after you, and then you in turn figure out like, what should I do to preserve my research funding, or what should I do to preserve my, law firm credibility or whatever. But and so he does, there is this desire to not have us act collectively, and that I think is really important. And number two, again, it does feel like things are really bad right now, but I mean, the public is not behind these things, and we have to keep that in mind. And I don't know, like I said, this answer falls short, but that's kind of where I am.
No, I totally hear that. And I will say one source of optimism for me over the last couple of months has actually been the polling. There was a result in there, Chris, that I don't think you put up on the screen, but it really struck me. It was 72% agreed that companies should give additional consideration to qualified candidates from underrepresented backgrounds. So people with disabilities, people from rural areas, veterans, and people of color. 72%. And I felt like that question kind of crystallized for me. It's like there's nothing more DEI than that, right? We want to recruit a diverse applicant pool. We want to take into consideration if you are, come from an underrepresented background, you have the qualifications. This is not a quota that we're filling, right? That's not DEI. And we're just going to give you another look, right? That was astounding to me that it was 72%. And I will say, personally, I felt like that was a place where we can sort of center ourselves, that there is something worth defending and protecting, and we should fight for that. And that's also the jumping off point for kind of building our collective future, right? So this was super helpful. I would encourage, those of you who are interested, please feel free to put in the chat, um, or in the Q&A. If you put it in the Q&A, I believe only I can see your identity. And so I can anonymize things if you're not comfortable putting things in the chat. So if you have questions, and if you have insights, things that you're doing in your organization that you feel like are working particularly well, stakeholder engagement that you're doing, or how you're finding that balance between defending what you have and building what comes next. So in the meantime, there's a couple of questions. One is, so Chris, I think this is for you. We were talking about the messages that work in the private sector. And the question is, could these messages backfire if some companies choose to discriminate against people of color, women, et cetera? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I hear that. Although, I mean, I guess the argument isn't we should be able to do whatever we want, including discriminate. It's we should be able to hire a diverse team if we feel like it is to our benefit. Like, the government shouldn't be telling us not to do that. I mean, I do think, like I said, Republicans like the message more about companies should be able to do what they want, sort of full stop. Democrats didn't like that because of what you raised there, which is, well, would that then open the door for discrimination? Yeah, I mean, obviously that's not what the messaging should be. It shouldn't be like, hey, do anything you want, including discriminate.
Can I just jump in on this one, Emily?
Yes, please.
Really agree with what Christine said. And a message that I think is often getting lost in the chaos that we're experiencing around DEI efforts is that companies, organizations still have civil rights obligations that they need to be meeting. That those obligations have not changed. Maybe they've been perverted in some ways by this administration, but that is an affirmative thing that organizations need to make sure they are doing. They need to make sure that their employees, their patients, the folks that they're serving are not experiencing discrimination based on protected characteristics. And that is something we need to say over and over and over again. And that is the role of government, to hold the private sector accountable. Additionally, like some of the things that we saw in terms of what people want to see with DEI, like emergency paid childcare. Yes, if corporations, businesses, nonprofits want to do that, terrific. But we know that there is a role for government regulation and policy when it comes to things like paid family and medical leave, having paid sick days, having access to temporary disability insurance. So yes, this polling and this conversation, I think, has been focused on what the private sector can do to advance diversity, equity, inclusion, but we have to say that there's an important role for government, even in times like this.
Oh, it's a great reminder. There was another question further up in the chat thread. I apologize. I almost missed it. Chris, did we define the term DEI to polling respondents, or did we just use the term DEI?
Right. So we said, here's exactly how it said. When you see the following words or phrases, would you say your view of it is, positive or negative? So DEI was not explained, and that's on purpose. And so a year ago, we had 40-some% who didn't know what that was because we didn't explain it. And so that's important information. But this year now they are familiar and they do know, and only 14% were unfamiliar. And then we tested diversity, equity, and inclusion. Again, no explanation, just that.
And I can answer. So one of the questions in the Q&A is any of the data broken down by race? And the answer is yes, a lot of it is. And you should feel free to go to the website. It's www.the-nxtlevel.com. I put it in the chat thread, and that has the full polling results which includes results broken out by race, gender, party affiliation, and age. Another question for you all, were you able to determine why the DEI narrative generally centers on marginalizing people of color? I don't know that I'm fully getting the question, but I think it's like why it's focused on people of color as opposed to, for example, people with disabilities, people with physical health issues, people with mental health issues, et cetera, people over 50.
Well, I don't know entirely. I feel like two things. I think diversity, equity, inclusion efforts really became much more publicly visible after the George Floyd murder, and that which was about race. And I think initially there was a lot of discussion about inequitable treatment by race and that sort of thing. And I think that was very connected when diversity, equity, inclusion efforts became much more high profile. There was sort of a racial incident that seemed to sort of spark that, at least in the public's mind. And also, opponents are making this about race. I mean, that basically, I mean, you know, you have the president of the United States, when a bridge collapses, blame the mayor of the city because he's Black and say he was a DEI hire. Or you have, you know, other leaders on, you know, other influencers, if you will, to say, well, if I see a Black pilot, I'm going to wonder if they were hired because of DEI. And they are advancing that narrative.
Yeah, I think that is one thing that we noticed, or that I took away from the focus grouping that Chris and the Heart team did, was there were almost like three competing definitions of DEI out there, right? There's the DEI that we aspire to, like in our dreams. There's the DEI as many people experience it in corporate America, right? It's a workshop or a training that you go to. And then there's the DEI as the Trump administration has defined it. And all of those, you know, the real life experiences and the administration's definitions have been so loud. And we, I think, haven't done as good of a job of articulating what it could be and the concrete benefits that it could offer to everyone, or connecting the dots, right? That like, hey, the curb cut that you enjoy, the private nursing rooms that other people can also take advantage of, the health studies, the scientific research, right? That all of that is also DEI. And so some of it is, I think, maybe also a little bit on us. Girdar, I saw you took yourself off mute.
Yeah, I just want to affirm what Christine said. I think there is a very strong and long history of anti-Blackness that's running throughout all of this. And I think that then shows up in how people think about diversity, equity, inclusion. Another finding that we didn't talk about that surprised me that connects with this is that people are not willing or able to speak about how diversity, equity, inclusion has benefited them. And that kind of cut across all the demographic groups, or nearly all of them, if I'm remembering correctly. And I think that suggests to me two things. One, we have internalized these messages about DEI being that people are promoted based on things other than merit. And two, for people and communities that have had to constantly defend their value and their worth, it can be very hard to say that we have benefited from this set of strategies. And I do see that both as disheartening, but also as an opportunity. I'm just going to say quickly, there are so many ways that diversity, equity, inclusion has benefited me personally. I think oftentimes Asian Americans are a wedge community among people of color around issues of diversity, equity, inclusion. We definitely saw that in terms of race-based affirmative action in higher ed. But I'll just give a real quick example of how DEI benefited me. My dad came to the US in the mid-60s as a graduate student. And if he were 10 years older, he wouldn't have been able to come because our immigration laws at that point very intentionally kept people out from Africa, Asia, and South America. But because of the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965, the US government said, we believe that there are, and he came particularly through kind of a science pathway, we believe that there are talented, meritorious, budding scientists from every part of the world. And we want to make sure we get the best and the brightest. Now, was he more qualified than a budding scientist from Western Europe? Maybe or maybe not, but it was that the opportunity wasn't equal. The merit was there, but the opportunity wasn't equal. And I think we need to reflect on and then tell the stories of how diversity, equity, inclusion have benefited us as people, because then I think it makes it more common for others to do so.
That's so great, and thank you for sharing that. I love the personal touch. There's another question in the chat, which is, how would we recommend we approach education on DEI, given the executive orders that specifically call out DEI training? And I will also refer you again to the Next Level website, where we do have some resources to help you all, whether it's in a corporate context or an NGO context, engage with your stakeholders in ways that don't feel fraught, that are not explicitly about, quote, DEI, but are more about, building the future and very much rooted in the values of diversity, equity, inclusion. And it's suggestions like talking to your employees or your staff about what would give you a greater sense of belonging, what would make you want to stay here for another 3 to 5 years, right? What do you love about this organization or this company? What do you wish for it going forward? So it's ways to do the work without hopefully raising any red flags. Girdhar, do you have anything to add? And then I have one final closing question for the two of you.
Just a quick thing on the training piece. Your answer was right on, Emily. I'll give sort of a legal and policy answer, and that is, I think people might have heard that there have been a lot of lawsuits about workplace DEI trainings, creating quote unquote hostile work environments. The vast majority of those have failed. That doesn't mean that it doesn't create a chilling effect on organizations that want to advance DEI trainings, but just to be clear that most of the lawsuits that have played out along those lines have not resulted in findings against employers or organizations. And I think that's a really important thing to emphasize.
No, that's a very helpful addition. So last question for the two of you in our final minute. How do we show care for ourselves and one another in this time? It's tough times. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of stress, frustration. So how do we care for ourselves and one another?
I can jump in. Tell the people you love and who you value that you love and value them. I think we don't speak from the heart enough, and I think oftentimes, even with our family members, that we don't have conversations about the important things because it can be hard to do it. But I think now's the time to. And I'll just say one other thing. In my faith tradition, there's this idea that if you're meditating on something, if you're thinking about something, meditate on things that are true, that are noble, that are just, that are pure, that are lovely, that are of good report, anything of virtue. And those are the things that we should be meditating on and thinking about. Even in a world like we're facing, there are things that are pure, there are things that are true, there are things that are noble, and we need to remind ourselves of that every day.
Here's what I think about. I think you look at yourself and you think, well, what can I do? But here's what you can do. Like every single day, you have a ton of interactions, perhaps. And that could be like you go to the Starbucks. So you hold the door for the person. And then when you go up to the counter, you say, "You're doing a really great job today. I noticed how you said hi to everybody." Like, I just find that like everyone's walking around with so much anger that just being kind and helps diffuse that anger so much. Like reinforcing our connections as neighbors and as fellow humans. Like just in the everyday things you do. Yeah, go ahead of me, merge in. Or, here, let me hold the door for you. Or you're really working hard. I can see how hard you're working. What a great employee you are. Or any of those things. And that is absolutely within your control. Like you can be kind of a nice person and call out other people, and it may be the only nice thing they hear all day. And it's not a big thing. And that is what I am trying to do.
Thank you both so much for that. I love how we went from the deep inner to your inner circle and then to the outer circle, right? Like the people that you're just coming across. Thank you both so much for sharing your time, your wisdom, your insights, your experiences with us. Thank you to everyone who was able to make it for the webinar. I'm sorry we went a couple of minutes over, but I hope it was worth it. And feel free to reach out to someone on the Raben team if you have any follow-up questions. And a good afternoon to you all. You all are doing amazing work. We appreciate you, and we're so grateful to be in this space together with all of you.